Don't worry.
The impassive leader of the X-Men has had quite a tumultuous journey so far, including his roller coaster of romances. Scott Summers, better known as Cyclops, was the ideal radical the entire mutant kind needed to keep itself alive. He started as a confused and scared youth with mutant powers that manifested uncontrollably and explosively. His entire arc is impressive as he eventually went on to become the clear-headed, if not militaristic, leader of the X-Men who was determined to carry Xavier's legacy of peace between mutants and humans. Many assume that Jean Grey was Cyclops' one and only love, but that's not entirely true. In this marvelous video, let's talk about every lover of Cyclops. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Major relationships. Let's discuss the significant relationships that had a profound impact on Scott's life, and his love for them led to his logic to be blinded by various instances. Jean Grey. Jean Grey is known as the Omega-level mutant, whose power lies in her telekinesis and telepathy. She appeared in the very first X-Men comic issue in 1963. Her mutant abilities reveal themselves and lead her to become a part of Xavier's school for gifted youngsters. Eventually, Professor X decided that Jean was suitable to become the fifth member of the X-Men team, which was also the moment he met Cyclops. Cyclops is hesitant to let Jean in since he is apprehensive of his highly destructive mutant abilities and fears accidentally hurting Jean. When the two began dating, their relationship was a breath of peace amidst the chaos of being mutants. Even when Jean left the team after the events of Krakoa, the two continued seeing each other. All seemed well until the events of the Dark Phoenix saga passed. In space, a dying Jean accepted the help of the Phoenix Force, which used its own essence to create a copy of its host. Then it hid away the real Jean in a healing cocoon. Scott, in a desperate bid to search for his true love, dove into the debris just as Jean rose from the ashes and claimed to be the Phoenix. Even after this, Cyclops continued to fiercely believe in her, and his unwavering love for Jean stood fast. In his confrontation with the Dark Phoenix, the cosmic entity asked why Scott cared if Jean lived or died, a question that felt like death itself. After her apparent death, Scott pursued multiple relationships as a way to fill the void that Jean's absence left.
Your dark desire.
They shall know my inferno!
Madeline Prior. Scott was in Alaska to visit his grandfather when he stumbled across a woman who looked strikingly similar to Jean. The woman introduced herself as Madeline Pryor, and the two couldn't deny the attraction they felt for each other. A grief-stricken Scott fell in love with Pryor as time passed. It felt as though he was reunited with his dead love's ghost. Eventually, the two got married, and Scott decided to give up his X-Men lifestyle to keep Madeline safe from danger, and the two worked as pilots instead. Professor X then confirmed that Maddie was pregnant with her husband's child, but Scott was shown to be impassive toward the announcement. When Scott heard news of Jean being back from the dead, he walked out on his wife and newly born child. If things couldn't get any worse for Maddie, she was shot by the Marauders while her baby boy named Nathan Summers was abducted. Mr. Sinister proceeded to wipe out all records and traces of Maddie's existence. It was revealed that Madeline Prior was actually Jean's clone created by Mr. Sinister. The evil mastermind used the healing cocoon the real Jean was encased in and genetically engineered a clone for one sole purpose. He wished to use the offspring of Maddie and Scott as the ultimate weapon to defeat Apocalypse. When Maddie believed she was truly alone, the X-Men came to her aid, and she joined the team. When she saw Scott and Jean on TV as part of the new X Factor, Maddie became enraged and recklessly made a deal with the demon named Nasserth. The demon turned her into the Goblin Queen.
Jean.
Emma Frost. After Scott's return to the X-Men, he felt mentally unstable, while at the same time there was a visible divide in his relationship with Jean. He continued pushing her away whilst attending therapy sessions with Emma Frost. Emma Frost was notoriously known as the White Queen of the Hellfire Club. She was a powerful telepathic mutant who possessed the ability to transform her body into an indestructible material made of diamond. Emma had seemingly reformed her ways and began working for the X-Men. Under the guise of therapy, Emma and Scott started to have an affair in the most unlikely way, telepathically. In a bizarre turn of events, Jean caught them in the act, in the astral plane, even saying that she knew she would find her husband in Emma's mind. Jean Grey confronted Emma as she telepathically rampaged through the White Queen's buried memories and secrets. Emma realized that she had genuinely fallen in love with Scott Summers. Following this, it was said that Emma was assassinated in her diamond form, which left her shattered into several pieces. Beast scrambled to rejoin the pieces, and she was brought back to life by none other than Jean. After the debacle with Zorn, Jean was killed, and Xavier left the X-Men to find himself again. In the fleeting moments of Jean's death, she urged Scott to pursue what brought him joy. She realized he was happy with Emma and gave them her blessings. Naturally, the other X-Men strongly disapproved of this relationship, believing that Scott was tainting Jean's love. Other love interests. Now, let's move on to Cyclops' other love interests. Lovers with whom he had relationships, but these didn't have a significant impact on his life. As a crucial part of the X-Men, Scott is bound to meet countless people on his innumerable expeditions across the world. Lee Forrester. Lee Forrester made her appearance in the Uncanny X-Men number 143 as the sea captain of the ship named Arcadia. Lee met Scott when he came to work for her as a regular sailor. This was right after the events of the Dark Phoenix saga. Jean's death had left Scott an emotional wreck. Perhaps as a form of distraction or an attempt to clear his head, Cyclops momentarily left the X-Men. He had expected the captain to be a man, but was met with Lee instead, a straightforward, living-in-the-moment kind of woman who instantly struck a chord with Scott. During their first sailing together, the pair were almost killed near the Bermuda Triangle and found themselves washed up on a strange island. The storm that caused their ship to crash also made Scott lose his glasses. He was forced to hide his mutant abilities from Lee, but once she found out, the captain didn't seem to mind. On the island, the two built an intimate, if not romantic, relationship till the moment they encountered the ultimate tyrant. It turned out that Magneto ran a secret city on the island as his headquarters. Scott remained wary, knowing who they were dealing with, while Lee treated Magneto with respect and kindness. This led Magneto to question his hatred of humans slightly. After a short but intense and ardent run, Lee broke up with Scott. She believed that they were from completely different worlds and didn't belong together. Colleen Wing. Colleen Wing spent the majority of her youth in northern Japan, where she was trained by her grandfather in the ways of the samurai. After her return to New York, Colleen made fast friends with Danny Rand, aka Iron Fist. The two would go on to work together on several top-secret and dangerous missions and make a great team. She also joined the Heroes for Hire business along with Luke Cage and Misty Knight. She was momentarily abducted by an old enemy, which led her straight into a heroin addiction, but her friends stood by her side the whole time. Then, Colleen and Misty started a similar organization named the Daughters of the Dragon around the time of the superhuman Civil War. Colleen was portrayed as a skilled samurai, martial artist, and cunning detective. In X-Men number 113, after yet another canonical death of Jean, Scott set off in search of ways to mend his broken heart. In a bold move for that time, Colleen asked Scott out on a date, and he agreed, firmly believing that Jean was gone forever. After their wholesome date, the two discussed what a proper relationship would look like for them. Colleen then gave Scott a key to his apartment as an invitation to drop by any time he wished to. Colleen and Scott's brief relationship was hardly mentioned or talked about by fans. It came to an end when Jean was resurrected for the first time, of many more to come. Laura Kinney. Geneticist Sarah Kinney, who worked for the facility, was responsible for creating a genetic clone of Wolverine to serve as a private assassin for the clandestine group. Sarah Kinney created a female clone and mixed some of her own DNA into the experiment, thus becoming Laura's surrogate mother. While living in the facility, Laura, aka termed X-23, was made into a lethal weapon through brutal and inhumane training. Her surrogate mother even risked her own life in an attempt to allow Laura to escape the deranged facility. A young Laura wished to end the creation of human weapons such as herself and hunted down Logan at the Xavier Mansion. Eventually, she came to terms with her identity and became a respectable mutant in their community. During the all-new X-Men storyline, the comic followed the original members of the team who found themselves plucked from the past and dropped into the present day. While they struggled to make peace with the actions of their future selves, the members also befriended the most unlikely characters. For instance, Jean Grey struck up a dynamic relationship with Miles Morales, while Scott Summers felt emotionally drawn to Laura Kinney. While Laura was wary of intimacy and affection touch, she allowed Scott in, and the two shared a brief fling, something that didn't go unnoticed by other teammates, including Jean.
Their distance this time.
Oh yeah, she likes you. She's just playing hard to get.
Rogue. Anna Marie, better known as Rogue, had her powers manifest in the most dramatic way. She was a seemingly ordinary teenager who, during her first kiss, accidentally pushed her lover into a lifelong coma. As a runaway, she was taken in by Mystique and her partner Irene Adler, aka Destiny. Under Mystique's care, Rogue joined the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants and decided to take on Carol Danvers. Rogue's power consisted of absorbing the life energy from her opponents, which left them worn down. She eventually ended up seeking the help of Charles Xavier and went on to become one of the X-Men. Rogue and Cyclops' story was explored in the 2000 TV show X-Men Evolution. It was a different take on the team's story, with many of them being teenagers trying to find a balance between their studies and their state of being mutants. The show portrays the adorable romantic tension between Rogue and Scott. It was established that Scott was a long-term student at Xavier's school and was the most popular kid among his peers. He also had a crush on Jean Grey, but also never acted on it. In the episode titled Turn of the Rogue, where Rogue and Scott are pitted together to survive a blizzard, the teenage mutant realized her feelings for Scott went beyond simply friendship as the two bonded deeply over their shared fears of hurting others and feeling isolated with their powers. Psylock. Betsy Braddock, better known as Psylock, is the older sister of Captain Britain. Elizabeth was known to be a powerful psychic mutant with a wide array of telekinetic abilities. She started out by joining Strike's PSI division, but was captured by Mojo and Spiral shortly thereafter. They codenamed her Psylock and forced her to perform in their intergalactic soap opera named Wild Ways. After being freed, Psylock decided she had enough of being a victim and took her fate into her own hands. Betsy joined Xavier's school in an attempt to gain mastery over her mutant powers. Psylock and Cyclops found themselves in a little romance back in the X-Men comic issues of the 90s. When Betsy joined the X-Men, she naturally felt attracted to Scott, who at the time didn't feel fulfilled with his life. Back then, the X-Men were divided into the Blue Team and the Gold Team. Betsy and Scott were both on the Blue Squad and spent a ton of time together in close quarters. Betsy was evident with her intentions as she fiercely flirted with Scott. These attempts at seduction pissed Jean off, who confronted Betty, which ended up in a bloody fight. Avid readers found this whole affair a bit icky and believed Scott was also responsible for letting his thoughts wander. The flirting got so intense that Scott had to go AWOL to sort out his priorities. Captain Marvel, Earth X. Carol Danvers is one of the most prominent members of Marvel history. Her character is best known to be the subject of otherworldly radiation, which turns her into a superhuman with unmatched strength and other powers. Her comic book debut, back in the 60s, was revolutionary, as she was a young, capable woman who overcame rigid gender roles and managed to rise to the top of challenging military occupations. The version of Danvers, who dated Cyclops, was from a reality known as Earth 9997, aka Earth X. Carol from this reality shared her origins with her Earth 616 counterpart and continued picking up several aliases, eventually landing on Captain Marvel. Many say this was to honor the original Mar-Vell, captain of Kree's armies. Captain Marvel had left Earth to help the people of Kree fight against a relentless Skrull invasion. In the Mutant X dimension, Cyclops wasn't the leader of the X-Men. Instead, he had followed his father, Corsair's path. His father had modeled himself after legends of pirates on Earth, such as Cyclops on Earth X had as well. He even went on to become the captain of the Starjammers, which was the moment he met Carol. Ironically, Scott, in this reality, seemed genuinely happy. This joy was added to his life when he began dating Captain Marvel. The majority of people believe that this is a strange pairing, as the two are the most unlikely couple. The two fit well together, Carol's stoicism balancing out Scott's streak of mad fun. Polaris Ultimate. Laura Dane of Earth 616 is best known to be the daughter of the troublesome Magneto. She inherited her father's powers of magnetism and hence took up the alias of Polaris. Still young and naive, Polaris was manipulated by the villain named Mesmero, but ended up being rescued by the X-Men. Initially, she decided to join the X-Men team, but soon felt the repercussions of being a mutant, and the lifestyle one had to lead in order to survive. Ultimately, Polaris decided to leave the mutant life behind and study geophysics instead, but given who her father was, she was constantly dragged amidst mutant conflicts and eventually became a part of the X Factor. For the mutants, love often bloomed on the battlefield since Polaris' time, and the X-Men led her to fall in love with Havoc, aka Alex Summers, who was Cyclops' brother. Their relationship is canonical to the Earth 616 reality. It turned out to be a complicated one, being on and off again. The Ultimate comic universe is an entirely different story. Polaris of Earth 1610 is said to have dated Scott Summers, who clearly has a type. Fans noticed that he tended to drift towards powerful women with an iron will and the ability to control their surroundings psychically. In the Earth 1610 reality, the two had a brief affair before Polaris got together with Alex Summers. Even in this reality, while the pair shared a fervent connection, it fizzled out, and they ended up with partners they truly loved. Frenzy, Age of X. Joanna Cargill, also known as Frenzy, possessed many superhuman attributes thanks to her genetic mutations. She was a runaway who had accidentally killed her abusive father when her powers manifested. As a youth, she was brainwashed by Magneto's propaganda and joined up with the Apocalypse in the fight against humankind. She was recruited by the Acolytes, and she also made a Genosian ambassador to Magneto. In the Age of X storyline, one of Legion's personalities radically altered reality. This reality was known as Earth 11326, in which the team of X-Men never existed. All the mutants lived in Fortress X, where they had to protect themselves against relentless attempts of invasion by humans. Since the X-Men were never formed, human-mutant relations had reached an irreparable state. Frenzy led the mutant army division named Temp Cadre and was married to Basilisk. Basilisk was none other than Scott Summers' counterpart of this reality. He had surgically removed his eyelids and implanted ruby quartz lenses on his eyeballs. However, the married couple soon began to notice the flaws of this reality and worked together to restore the truth. While Frenzy chose to keep her memories of Utopia, Cyclops wished to erase them. He conveniently forgot all traces of their commitment and love for one another. All was not lost, as her relationship with Scott inspired Frenzy to do good and join the X-Men of Earth 616. Marvelous verdict. By this point, we can say that Scott is notorious for having a wild ride in place of his love life. Several of his relationships stem from mourning the multiple deaths of his long-standing love, Jean Grey. Jean has a passionate dynamic with Logan, and Cyclops falling hard for Emma Frost. Their bloody past permanently tainted their love in the present. Undoubtedly, over his whole journey, Scott has gained his share of trust and abandonment issues. Who knew that simply being one of the X-Men doesn't make you a great lover? And if you haven't liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.